At my son's school event, my mom and dad said my child is worthless. Compared to my golden brother's kids, telling me not to expect things will be fine. For my bad boy, everyone was speechless, so I got my payback. Hey everyone, my name is Daniel, and I'm 38 years old. I've been a single father for the last 4 years, ever since my wife Lisa died during childbirth with our son Tyler. It's been a complete emotional roller coaster trying to navigate parenthood alone, but somehow we've managed to make it work. I've always tried my best to make things special for Tyler because, well, he didn't ask for any of this difficult situation we found ourselves in. My family has been supportive in their own way over the years, which mostly translates to them criticizing my parenting choices while simultaneously asking me for loans. Loans that they never seem to get around to repaying, I might add. It's become a frustrating pattern that I've just learned to accept as part of dealing with family. Last weekend was Tyler's preschool graduation, and my son had been talking excitedly about finally being a real big kid for weeks leading up to the ceremony. My younger brother Brandon is 33 and has twin girls who are the same age as Tyler. He suggested that we organize a joint family dinner to celebrate all 3 kids reaching this milestone together. Let's split the planning, he said with his usual confident smile. Well, I think you can guess who ended up doing all the actual work. I spent the entire day cleaning my house from top to bottom, decorating with those cheesy graduation cutouts you can buy at the party store, and cooking Lisa's famous chicken parmesan recipe that Tyler absolutely loves. I even tackled making that incredibly complicated tiramisu cake that Lisa used to make for special occasions. My parents always complained that it was unnecessarily fancy and time-consuming, but Tyler cherishes it because he has pictures of his mom making that exact same cake, and it makes him feel connected to her memory. Brandon showed up a full 50 minutes late with my parents in tow, and of course, they brought absolutely nothing to contribute to the celebration. The first thing out of Brandon's mouth wasn't an apology for being late, but complaints about how difficult it was to find parking on my street. The twins came running in wearing matching designer outfits that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, while Tyler was practically vibrating with excitement to see his cousins. The dinner actually went reasonably well at first. Tyler proudly showed everyone the little certificate they had given him at the graduation ceremony, beaming with pride as he explained what each part meant. The twins immediately started talking over him about their upcoming ballet recital, but Tyler didn't seem to mind the interruption. He was just happy to have family around to share his big day with. Then came the moment I had been both anticipating and dreading: gift time. My parents went first with Tyler's present, and they brought him what appeared to be an educational tablet. However, when I looked closer, it seemed like something that had been sitting in a clearance bin since around 2018, gathering dust until they remembered they needed to bring something. When I tried to turn the device on to show Tyler how it worked, I discovered that the battery was completely dead. Even worse, when I looked for the charger, it was nowhere to be found. Apparently, they had managed to lose the most essential component. My dad just shrugged dismissively when I mentioned the missing charger and said, "Well, he can learn to fix it. It'll be good for building character." This was typical of his approach to most problems: turn every inconvenience into some kind of life lesson about resilience. Then my parents turned their attention to the twins and presented them with their gifts. I watched in stunned silence as they handed over Universal Studios tickets, along with these elaborate charm bracelets that featured actual birthstones set in what looked like real gold. The contrast between the gifts was so glaringly obvious that even Tyler, at his young age, couldn't help but notice. I saw his bright smile begin to fade just slightly as the twins erupted into screams of pure excitement over their expensive presents. My friend Jessica, who has basically become family at this point over the years, was the only person who had actually paid attention to what Tyler might want. She gave him a microscope kit that he had been pointing out in science catalogs for months, his eyes lighting up every time we passed it in stores. When he opened her gift, his face absolutely lit up with genuine joy, and he immediately asked if we could set it up together that very night. "Isn't that a bit too advanced for him?" my mom asked, looking genuinely concerned as she examined the microscope kit. "The twins are already taking violin lessons, you know. Maybe something more artistic would be better for Tyler's development." I bit my tongue hard, forcing myself to stay quiet. I've gotten remarkably good at that particular skill over the years of dealing with these subtle criticisms. But something was really starting to bother me about the whole situation, and I couldn't quite shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. Just 3 weeks earlier, My parents had come over to my house with a sob story about needing to borrow $3,500 for emergency home repairs. They gave me this elaborate explanation about how their roof was leaking and causing water damage, and how they needed the money immediately to prevent further structural problems. Like I always do when family asks for help, I wrote them a check without hesitation, no questions asked. But now, here they were, casually handing out Universal Studios tickets, and expensive jewelry like money was no object. Those Universal tickets alone had to cost well over $1,200 for the package they were describing to the twins, complete with hotel stays and meal plans. During dinner, I decided to casually probe the situation a bit. "So, how did you manage to swing the Universal trip?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light and conversational. I thought things were pretty tight financially with the roof repairs and everything. My mom nearly choked on her wine when I asked the question, but she recovered quickly with that practiced smile she's perfected over the years. "Oh, we found this amazing special grandparent package deal online," she explained smoothly. "It was very reasonable, and your father's bonus came through earlier than expected, so the timing worked out perfectly." I had to blink a few times to process what she had just said. Bonus? My father has been retired for several years now. What kind of bonus could he possibly be receiving? The whole explanation made absolutely no sense. My dad didn't even flinch at the obvious inconsistency in their story. "Doesn't mean I don't have income streams," he grunted defensively. "Not that it's any of your business how we manage our finances anyway." Then, as if to deliberately change the subject and avoid any further questions, he suddenly turned to Brandon and launched into this elaborate story about some golf tournament win he'd apparently had recently. I decided to let the whole thing go in that moment because Tyler was sitting right next to me, and I absolutely wasn't about to start a family argument in front of him during what was supposed to be his special celebration. But unfortunately, that wasn't the end of their inappropriate comments for the evening. A few minutes later, my mom leaned over toward me with that same plastic smile still plastered on her face. "Honestly, Daniel, maybe if you didn't overthink absolutely everything all the time," she said in a voice that was supposed to sound helpful but came across as condescending, "you'd be able to treat your son to nice things too. You always make everything so transactional and complicated." "Exactly," my dad chimed in, cutting his steak with considerably more force than was necessary. "You're always keeping tabs on everything, always acting like you're the only one who's struggling financially. Maybe if you spent less time playing the victim and more time focusing on what's actually important for family, you wouldn't be so bitter and resentful all the time." I clenched my jaw so hard I thought my teeth might crack. All I had done was ask a simple, reasonable question about how they could afford an expensive vacation just weeks after claiming they needed emergency financial help. But somehow, in their minds, I was the one being unreasonable and creating problems. After dinner was finished, the kids went off to play in Tyler's room while the adults lingered over coffee in the dining room. I excused myself to use the bathroom, and on my way back through the house, I happened to pass by the kitchen where my parents and Brandon were having what appeared to be a private conversation in hushed tones. I wasn't intentionally trying to eavesdrop on their discussion, but when I heard my name mentioned, I instinctively stopped walking and listened more carefully to what they were saying. "Just ask your brother to pay for the girls' summer science camp," my dad was saying in a low voice. "He'll do it without question if you tell him the girls really need it for their educational development and future opportunities." My mom's voice joined the conversation, adding, "He's been like a cash cow ever since Lisa died. All that guilt he carries around makes him incredibly easy to manipulate and get money from. His kid is too much like him anyway," Brandon replied, with that smugly superior laugh that I've always found absolutely insufferable. "Smart enough, but no real spark or personality. The money's definitely better spent on the twins. They actually have potential and charisma." I felt like I had been punched directly in the gut with tremendous force. Standing there in my own hallway, listening to my family casually discuss how to manipulate me for money. 4 years of loans and temporary help flashed through my mind like a horrific slideshow. All those times they had come to me with financial emergencies, all the constant subtle comparisons between Tyler and the twins, all the little digs about how I was supposedly raising him wrong. It all suddenly made perfect, terrible sense. The worst part was remembering how they had blamed me for Lisa's death in the weeks and months following the tragedy. Comments like, "If you had taken her to a better hospital, maybe things would have turned out differently." Or, "She was always working too hard, always stressed out from taking care of you and your needs." Those words had cut deep during my most vulnerable time, and now I realized they had been systematically using that manufactured guilt to control me financially. Every instinct in my body wanted to burst through that kitchen door and confront them immediately, to demand explanations and apologies for what I had just heard. But then, Tyler's innocent face flashed in my mind. He was having such a genuinely good night, laughing and playing with his cousins despite everything. He loved the twins unconditionally, regardless of how the adults in his life were behaving, and I couldn't bear the thought of ruining that for him. So instead, I forced myself to backtrack quietly down the hallway, deliberately making my footsteps louder on the return trip to announce my presence. I walked back into the living room with the most convincing fake smile I could manage plastered across my face, pretending I hadn't heard a single word of their conversation. After everyone finally left that evening and the house was quiet again, I went through the ritual of tucking Tyler into bed. He clutched the instruction manual for his new microscope against his chest like it was a precious teddy bear, already planning all the experiments he wanted to try the next day. Watching him drift off to sleep with such pure excitement and contentment, I felt my heart break a little more. After Tyler was completely asleep, I sat alone in my dark living room, trying to process everything I had witnessed and overheard that evening. I kept thinking about all the times over the past 4 years when I had written checks without hesitation, because family helps family. I thought about the business I had helped Brandon start with a substantial portion of Lisa's life insurance money. The business that was supposedly struggling financially, despite the brand new BMW that had mysteriously appeared in his driveway recently. Something fundamental inside me hardened that night. Tyler deserved so much better than this manipulation and disrespect. I deserved better than being treated like nothing more than a convenient ATM with legs. If Lisa were still alive, she would be absolutely furious if she knew how her family was being treated by the people who were supposed to love and support us. I picked up my phone and sent a text message to Jessica. "Need to talk. It's about my family situation." Her response came back immediately, as if she had been waiting by her phone. "Your place, 10:30 a.m. tomorrow. I've been waiting for you to finally figure this out." For the first time in 4 long years, I felt genuinely angry instead of just hurt and confused. The difference was startling and somehow empowering. Jessica showed up at exactly 10:30 a.m. the next morning, arriving with coffee and fresh bagels in hand. She has always been incredibly punctual, which is one of the many reasons she's absolutely crushed it in her marketing career, while I've remained stuck in the same engineering firm for years without much advancement. We've been close friends since our college days, back when she and Lisa were roommates sharing a tiny apartment off campus. After Lisa died, Jessica stepped up in ways I never could have expected or asked for. She became Tyler's unofficial aunt and my personal sanity check, always there when I needed someone to talk through the challenges of single parenthood. Her support has been invaluable over these difficult years. "So you finally heard them talking shit about you?" she said, without even bothering with small talk or pleasantries, immediately getting straight to the point as she fired up her laptop at my kitchen table. "You knew this was happening?" I asked, feeling like a complete idiot for being so blind to what was apparently obvious to everyone else. "I've been watching them take advantage of you for years," she sighed heavily, her fingers already typing rapidly across her keyboard. Lisa would have shut this down immediately if she were still alive. She never trusted Brandon, not even a little bit. That comment stung because it was absolutely true, and I knew it. Lisa had always kept my family at arm's length, especially after we got married and started building our own life together. At the time, I had chalked up her distance to normal in-law tension that happens in most families. But maybe she had seen something manipulative and toxic in their behavior that I was completely blind to, or maybe I just didn't want to see it. "How bad is the financial damage?" I asked, dreading the answer but knowing I needed to face the reality of the situation. "Let's find out exactly how bad it is," Jessica said grimly. She pulled up a detailed spreadsheet that she had apparently been maintaining without my knowledge. "I've been keeping track of every single time you've mentioned loaning them money over the past 4 years. Just the amounts you've actually told me about in our conversations." She turned her laptop screen toward me so I could see the numbers, and the total at the bottom made my stomach drop like I was on a roller coaster. The spreadsheet showed $84,650 in documented loans over the past 4 years, money that had never been repaid despite multiple promises and assurances. "There's more that we need to discuss," Jessica said, pulling up another window on her computer. "Remember when you helped Brandon start that construction company with Lisa's life insurance money? How could I possibly forget that decision? I had put $275,000 of Lisa's life insurance money into the business as startup capital, convinced by Brandon that it was a solid investment opportunity that would provide long-term financial security. Brandon had convinced me that I would be a silent partner while he handled all the day-to-day operations, and the business was officially called Twin Brothers Construction. It was supposed to be Tyler's inheritance someday, a way to secure his future financially. My 80% ownership stake on paper was meant to guarantee that my son would have something substantial to fall back on when he got older. "The business is failing, right?" I asked, already knowing that's what Brandon had been telling me for months. That's why they supposedly couldn't pay any dividends back to me as the majority owner, and why Brandon sometimes needed extra cash infusions to keep the operation afloat, despite being the partner who actually managed everything day to day. Jessica's expression turned absolutely grim as she prepared to deliver what I could tell was going to be devastating news. "That's exactly what he wants you to think, but it's not even close to the truth." Jessica spent the next hour methodically showing me what she had discovered through some research that probably skirted the very edge of what was legally acceptable. She had managed to find banking records, tax filings, and property purchase documents that painted a completely different picture than what Brandon had been telling me about the business. Contrary to all of Brandon's sob stories about the company struggling to stay afloat, Twin Brothers Construction had actually been consistently profitable for the past 2 years. Not just breaking even, but very profitable. However, the accounting had been deliberately manipulated to show losses on paper while systematically funneling money to my brother and parents through inflated consultant fees and completely fabricated business expenses. The company credit card statements were what finally broke my heart and made me realize the full scope of their betrayal. There were countless charges for high-end restaurants, expensive clothing stores, luxury vacations, and personal purchases that had absolutely nothing to do with construction work. The most damning piece of evidence was a $6,800 charge to Universal Vacations that had been processed just 4 days after my parents had borrowed money from me for those supposed emergency roof repairs. "They're essentially using the company as their personal piggy bank," Jessica explained, her voice filled with barely controlled anger on my behalf. "Meanwhile, you're the majority owner on paper, which means you're legally responsible for everything that happens. Which means if there's an audit or lawsuit, I'd be the one on the hook," I finished, the terrifying implications hitting me like a freight train. "Exactly," she confirmed. "And there's even more bad news. The quarterly tax payments for the business have been irregular and inconsistent. If the IRS decides to investigate the discrepancies, you could be facing serious legal consequences." My head was spinning as I tried to process the magnitude of what Jessica was telling me. I had trusted my brother completely with everything, not just the day-to-day operations, but with my son's financial future and my own legal liability. And he had been systematically robbing me blind while I struggled to give Tyler a decent life on my regular salary. Just at that moment, Tyler wandered into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He had slept in after all the excitement of his graduation party the night before, and seeing his innocent face made the betrayal feel even more personal and painful. "Morning, buddy," I said quickly, switching screens on Jessica's laptop so he wouldn't see the financial documents. "Want some breakfast?" As I prepared his favorite scrambled eggs, Tyler chatted happily about the party, completely unaware of the internal crisis I was experiencing. Then he said something that stopped me cold and made me nearly drop the spatula I was holding. "Dad, why didn't you want to go to Universal Studios with us?" I felt my heart sink into my stomach. "What do you mean, bud?" Tyler looked genuinely confused by my reaction, as if he had said something completely normal. "Uncle Brandon said the company bought Universal tickets for everyone in the family, but you didn't want to go because you're too busy with work." The sheer audacity of what I was hearing was almost too much to process. They were not only using my own company to buy themselves expensive vacations, but they were also telling my son that I was the one who didn't want to include him in family activities. They were making me look like the bad guy who was too focused on work to spend time with his own child. "When did Uncle Brandon tell you this?" I asked, trying desperately to keep my voice casual and not let Tyler see how upset I was. "When I went to get a glass of water last night," Tyler replied, poking at his eggs with his fork. "He was showing Grandma pictures of the Universal Hotel on his phone." Tyler's expression grew a little sad as he continued. "It's okay if you don't want to go, Dad. I know you have to work a lot to take care of us." My heart completely shattered at those words. This innocent, sweet kid thought I was choosing work over making special memories with him, all because my family was spinning elaborate lies to cover up their theft of his inheritance money. After breakfast, Tyler and I spent the entire morning working together on building his new microscope. He approached the task with such methodical precision, carefully reading each step of the instructions aloud with his little face scrunched up in serious concentration. The way he worked reminded me so much of Lisa that it physically hurt to watch. That same careful attention to detail, that same determination to get everything exactly right. As we worked side by side, assembling the various components and adjusting the focus mechanisms, I made a decision that would change everything. This manipulation and theft had to end, and it had to end now. I called Jessica again as soon as Tyler was distracted with exploring his new microscope. "I need a lawyer," I said, without any preamble or explanation, my voice filled with a determination I hadn't felt in years. "And not just any lawyer. I need a shark." "I've got just the person you need," she replied, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "Rebecca Torres. She specializes in business fraud and family financial disputes, and she's absolutely ruthless when it comes to protecting her clients." "Get me an appointment as soon as possible," I said firmly. "And I'm going to need a forensic accountant too." "Already on it," Jessica responded efficiently. "My firm uses a guy named Rodriguez who's former IRS. He can start digging through the records on Tuesday if you want." I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to set in motion would change everything permanently. "This could get really ugly, Jessica. They're going to hate me for this." "They already take advantage of you and treat you like garbage," she pointed out matter-of-factly. "The only difference is that now you'll finally stop letting them get away with it." That afternoon, while Tyler was taking his usual nap, I locked myself in my home office and began digging through every single financial record I could find related to Twin Brothers Construction. I pulled out startup documents, tax returns. The operating agreement that Brandon had assured me was completely standard, and email exchanges where he had explained why the business was supposedly struggling despite all the new equipment he seemed to keep buying. Looking at all of this documentation with fresh eyes and a clear perspective, the red flags were so glaringly obvious that I felt like a complete idiot for missing them for so long. The standard operating agreement gave Brandon unilateral authority to approve any business expenses under $12,000 without requiring my signature or approval. The struggling business that supposedly couldn't afford to pay me dividends somehow always had cash available for new trucks and expensive equipment upgrades. And there was always some convenient explanation about construction being seasonal whenever I asked detailed questions about the finances. My phone buzzed with a text message from Brandon, and the timing felt almost surreal. "Hey bro, the twins got into this amazing summer science program that would really give them an educational edge. I'd love to cover it myself, but things are pretty tight right now with the business investments we've been making. Any chance you could help out? It's $9,200 for both girls, and they'd really appreciate their uncle stepping up for them. In the past, I would have said yes immediately without even thinking about it. I would have been desperate for their approval, wanting the twins to like me, hoping that Tyler would somehow benefit from maintaining a close connection to his cousins. Now I could see it for exactly what it was. Just another manipulation, another calculated withdrawal from what they clearly viewed as the bank of Daniel the Sucker. I texted back, "Let me think about it. Things are a bit tight financially right now." His response came back immediately, which told me he had been sitting by his phone waiting. "No problem. I totally understand that family always has to come first." The girls were just really hoping to go, and they even mentioned how much they wanted to tell Tyler about all the cool experiments they'd be learning. You know how much he likes science stuff. He was actually using my son as leverage to try to manipulate me into giving him more money. The sheer audacity and calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. I put my phone down without responding and went to check on Tyler. He was still sleeping peacefully, clutching the stuffed rocket ship that Jessica had given him for his birthday. His room was modest compared to the lavish setups I had seen at Brandon's house for the twins. No expensive furniture or mountains of high-end toys, just books, space posters, and the few quality items I could afford after keeping us housed and fed. Tyler deserved so much better than this. Not just materially, but he deserved a family that actually valued him for who he was. He deserved people who saw how special and intelligent he was, instead of constantly comparing him unfavorably to his cousins. "I'm going to fix this," I whispered to him, gently brushing hair away from his forehead. "I promise you, buddy." My phone buzzed with an email from Jessica containing the lawyer's contact information and an appointment scheduled for Tuesday morning. The subject line read simply, "Time to play hardball." For the first time since overhearing that devastating conversation in my kitchen, I felt a genuine sense of control returning to my life. They had taken advantage of my grief, my guilt, and my desperate desire to keep some semblance of family close for Tyler's sake. They had systematically stolen from my son's future while pretending to care about his well-being. That was all ending now. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for Tyler. And when it came to protecting my son, I wasn't going to pull any punches or show any mercy. Rebecca Torres was exactly what I had expected when Jessica described her as a shark. She greeted me with a firm handshake, but didn't bother standing from behind her imposing glass desk. "Mr. Thompson," she said briskly, "Jessica speaks very highly of you." Rebecca was precisely what I had pictured when Jessica used that particular description. Impeccably tailored business suit, sharp bob haircut that looked like it cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and piercing eyes that seemed to calculate my net worth within seconds of my arrival in her office. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice," I said, settling into the leather chair across from her desk. "Jessica mentioned something about family business fraud," she replied, and her smile was brief but genuinely interested. Those happened to be three of my absolute favorite words to hear from a potential client. For the next hour, I methodically laid out the entire situation for her. I showed her all the documents I had brought along, including screenshots of text messages requesting money over the years, bank statements, and the operating agreement for Twin Brothers Construction. Rebecca took detailed notes on a legal pad, occasionally asking very specific clarifying questions about dates, amounts, and the exact nature of various transactions. Her expression remained completely neutral and professional throughout, but her increasingly rapid note-taking told me that she was finding plenty of material to work with. "Have you noticed any irregularities with your personal tax returns?" she asked, looking up from her notes. "Unexpected forms you didn't recognize? Deductions that seemed odd? Any letters or communications from the IRS?" "I don't think so," I replied, though her question made me realize I hadn't been paying as much attention as I should have. "I use a tax preparation service, but nothing seemed particularly unusual or out of place." She nodded thoughtfully, making another note. "We'll definitely want to verify that assumption. If they've been systematically manipulating the business finances the way you've described, they may have taken similar liberties with your personal tax returns as well. That possibility hadn't even occurred to me until she mentioned it. The thought that Brandon might have been messing around with my personal taxes in addition to everything else made my stomach clench with a new kind of anxiety. "How bad is this from a legal standpoint?" I asked, needing to understand the full scope of what I was potentially facing. Rebecca set down her pen and looked directly at me. "Based on what you've shown me here today, we're looking at fraud, embezzlement, and potentially tax evasion. This could mean serious jail time for the people involved." "Jesus," I whispered, the reality of the situation finally hitting me with full force. "You need to understand something very clearly before we proceed," she continued, leaning forward slightly. "If we pursue this case aggressively, it's going to get extremely ugly. Family disputes always do, but financial fraud cases involving this much money are particularly brutal. They will claim that you knew about everything all along and that you approved all of these transactions. They'll say that you're the one trying to defraud them now. They're going to paint you as the villain in this story, and they'll do everything they can to make you look like the bad guy. I'm prepared for that," I said, thinking about Tyler's innocent face when he thought I had deliberately excluded him from a family trip. I thought about all the years of subtle digs and unfavorable comparisons, and about Lisa, who would have gone absolutely nuclear if she had known how they were treating our son. "I'm completely done being their personal ATM," I said, with a firmness that surprised even me. "I'm done with all the manipulation and emotional blackmail. My only priority now is protecting what's left of my son's inheritance and making sure this never happens again." Rebecca's expression softened slightly, the first hint of genuine warmth I had seen from her. "Then here's exactly what we're going to do next." She outlined a comprehensive plan of attack. First, a forensic accountant would go through every single business record with a fine-tooth comb, documenting every discrepancy and irregularity. We would subpoena bank records, credit card statements, and tax filings going back to the very beginning of the business relationship. Her team would methodically document every single instance of financial misconduct, building an absolutely airtight case before we confronted Brandon or my parents with any accusations. "What should I do in the meantime?" I asked. "Brandon keeps sending me increasingly pushy text messages about that summer program money for the twins." "Keep stalling him," she advised. Don't confront him about anything yet, and don't give him any indication that something fundamental has changed in your relationship. We need them to remain comfortable and careless while we build our case. The more evidence they generate through their own actions, the stronger our position becomes. I left her office that day with a strange mixture of dread and relief coursing through me. There was absolutely no going back now. I had set something in motion that would change everything permanently. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was actually taking concrete steps to protect Tyler instead of just struggling to keep our heads above water financially. The next 2 weeks were absolutely surreal in every possible way. On the surface, everything continued exactly as it had before. I went to work every day, took care of Tyler's needs, and replied vaguely to Brandon's increasingly pushy and demanding text messages about the science camp money he wanted me to provide for the twins. Meanwhile, Rebecca's legal team was systematically uncovering financial horror stories that made my initial discoveries look like a minor parking ticket violation. The forensic accountant was finding evidence of over $475,000 that had been deliberately diverted from the business through various schemes. There were company credit cards being used for expensive family vacations, a boat that had been purchased and registered in Brandon's name using business funds, and completely fabricated consulting fees being paid to my parents for services that had never actually been provided. Each new revelation felt like another personal betrayal, another confirmation that I had been played for a complete fool while struggling to give Tyler a stable and comfortable life on my regular engineering salary. But the absolute worst discovery came during the 3rd week of investigation. "We found something extremely concerning," Rebecca said during one of our phone calls, and her normally composed and professional voice was tight with barely controlled anger on my behalf. "What now?" I asked, already dreading whatever bombshell she was about to drop. "Tax returns that were filed under your Social Security number, claiming income distributions from Twin Brothers Construction that you never actually received," she explained, her words coming out clipped and precise. "What exactly does that mean?" I asked, though I was already starting to understand the horrifying implications. "It means that someone filed official tax returns with the IRS listing substantial financial distributions to you as the majority owner of the business. Money that you never actually received, but that exists only on paper. The actual money went elsewhere entirely, but the tax liability for those phantom payments is listed under your name and Social Security number." The room seemed to tilt sideways as the full impact of what she was telling me sank in. "Are you saying that I potentially owe taxes on money that they actually stole from me?" "Potentially, yes," she confirmed grimly. "We're still working to determine the exact amount of the liability, but our initial estimates suggest you could be looking at approximately $105,000 in unpaid taxes on income you never received." I had to sit down immediately. The number was so staggering that I couldn't even process it properly. "I don't have that kind of money," I said weakly. "Not after everything they've already taken from me and Tyler." "I understand completely," Rebecca said, her voice becoming slightly more sympathetic. "The good news, if we can call it that, is that this discovery significantly strengthens our legal case. Tax fraud crosses a clear line from civil liability into potential criminal charges. It also gives us tremendous leverage in any settlement negotiations." "Settlement?" I echoed, confused by the direction the conversation was taking. "I don't want to settle with them. I want everything that's rightfully mine and Tyler's back. And having a strong settlement position actually helps us achieve exactly that," she explained patiently. "But you need to be mentally prepared for the possibility that some of the money is simply gone forever. It may have been spent on things that can't be recovered or returned. They may not have sufficient liquid assets available to repay everything they've taken over the years." That night, after Tyler was safely asleep in his bed, I sat alone on my back porch trying to process the full magnitude of what had been done to us. It wasn't just about the money anymore, though the financial impact was devastating. It was the calculated and deliberate nature of their betrayal that cut the deepest. The way they had systematically exploited my grief and trust while pretending to care about Tyler's well-being and future. My phone buzzed with a text message from my mother. "I was thinking we should have another family dinner this weekend. Tyler and the twins haven't had a proper play date in several weeks, and the girls really miss spending time with their cousin." The casual audacity of the message made me want to throw my phone across the yard. They were actively stealing from my son's future and using fraudulent tax documents to stick me with massive financial liability, while simultaneously using Tyler's loneliness and natural desire for family connection as a tool to manipulate me into compliance. The next morning, Rebecca called with another update. The forensic team found something else, she said, and I could hear a mixture of satisfaction and disgust in her voice. What now? I asked, honestly not sure how much more bad news I could handle. Signed corporate resolutions authorizing bonus payments for Brandon and padded consulting contracts for your parents, all with forged signatures that are supposedly yours. Forged signatures? I repeated, stunned by this new level of criminality. Very sloppy forgeries, too, she continued. The handwriting analysis shows they didn't even come close to matching your actual signature. It's like they didn't think you would ever notice, or worse, that you'd never do anything about it even if you did notice. That somehow made the entire situation feel even more insulting. Like they had so little respect for me that they couldn't even be bothered to forge my signature competently. Rebecca laid out all the available options for me with clinical precision. We could go completely nuclear, pursue civil lawsuits, court battles, and push for possible criminal charges that could result in real jail time. Alternatively, we could offer them a settlement opportunity, putting everything on the table, showing them all our evidence, and giving them one final chance to make things right before the situation escalated into something much more serious in public. The third option was to involve the district attorney immediately and go after them for fraud and tax evasion with the full weight of criminal prosecution behind us. Real jail time was a genuine possibility if we went that route. I didn't have a clear answer right away. Part of me still couldn't quite picture my parents or Brandon actually sitting behind bars in orange jumpsuits. But another part of me, the part that remembered every single time they had made me feel like nothing more than a wallet with legs, every subtle insult directed at Tyler, every manipulation designed to make me feel guilty for existing, wanted them to face serious consequences for what they had done. In the end, I told Rebecca the complete truth about my motivations. I wasn't pursuing this out of a desire for revenge or to hurt them personally. What I wanted was financial security for Tyler's future. I wanted them to admit what they had done, not just in legal documents, but personally to my face. I wanted acknowledgement of the harm they had caused. She nodded approvingly and recommended that we start with the settlement approach. If they refused to cooperate or tried to deny the evidence, then we would escalate to more aggressive legal action. 4 months of intensive investigation had revealed that they had stolen nearly $770,000 from me and Tyler over the years. It was time for a reckoning. Rebecca scheduled what they thought would be a routine business meeting. She had everything meticulously prepared. They would show up tomorrow thinking it was just another standard discussion about year-end tax planning. Instead, they would walk into a comprehensive presentation of evidence that would change everything permanently. The demands were straightforward. Full financial restitution, Brandon removed from all operational roles, complete control of the business transferred to me, and signed confessions acknowledging their wrongdoing. On the drive home from Rebecca's office, I found myself wondering if what we were planning was too harsh. Would Tyler someday hate me for breaking apart what remained of our extended family? But deep down, I knew that they had broken the family dynamic a long time ago. I was just finally picking up the pieces and trying to protect what mattered most. When I arrived home, the babysitter reported that Tyler had already eaten dinner and was getting ready for bed on schedule. I found him in his pajamas, carefully organizing his growing mineral collection on his bedroom floor with the methodical precision that reminded me so much of Lisa. "Hey, buddy," I said, sitting down on the edge of his bed. "What are you working on tonight?" "I'm organizing everything by geological type," he explained with complete seriousness. "Igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic. But I think this one might actually be a fossil instead of just a regular rock." He held up what looked like an ordinary pebble to me, but his excitement was infectious. "Can I ask you something?" I said, choosing my words carefully. "Do you actually enjoy spending time with Grandma and Grandpa and Uncle Brandon when they come over?" Tyler considered this question with the intense seriousness that only a child can bring to what adults might consider a simple inquiry. "Sometimes it's okay," he said thoughtfully. "But they always tell me that I talk too much about space and rocks and science stuff. And they make me share all my toys with the twins every time they're here. But the twins never have to share their special toys with me when we're at their house." My heart clenched at his matter-of-fact acceptance of this unfair treatment. "Do they say other things that make you feel bad about yourself?" I asked gently. He shrugged, suddenly becoming very interested in reorganizing his mineral specimens. "Grandma always says I'm too skinny and need to eat more food. Grandpa says I should play sports instead of reading so much because books won't make me tough. Uncle Brandon says I need to toughen up and stop being such a sensitive kid." Each casual comment felt like a knife being twisted in my chest. They weren't just stealing from him financially, they were systematically chipping away at his self-esteem and sense of worth. You know that none of those things are true, right? I said firmly. There's absolutely nothing wrong with being interested in science and books and learning new things. You're perfect exactly the way you are. That's what Mom would say, he replied matter-of-factly. Aunt Jessica told me that Mom always said smart kids like me are special. I smiled, though my throat felt tight with emotion. Your mom definitely would say that, and she would be absolutely right. That night, my resolve hardened into something unbreakable. This wasn't just about recovering stolen money anymore. It was about protecting Tyler from the same subtle psychological undermining that I had experienced throughout my entire childhood. The constant comparisons, the backhanded compliments, the persistent message that I was somehow never quite good enough no matter what I achieved. I would be damned if I let them do the same thing to my son. The next morning, I dropped Tyler off at his summer camp with an extra tight hug, holding him just a little longer than usual before heading downtown to Rebecca's law office. I had barely slept the night before, my mind cycling endlessly between righteous anger and stomach-churning anxiety about what was about to unfold. My phone had been buzzing repeatedly throughout the morning with text messages from Brandon and my father, both confirming their attendance at the business meeting that Rebecca had arranged under the pretense of discussing year-end tax planning and business strategy for Twin Brothers Construction. When I arrived at Rebecca's office building, her assistant immediately showed me to a small meeting room that was adjacent to the main conference room where the confrontation would take place. "We'll have you wait here until everyone has arrived," she explained professionally. "Miss Torres thinks it's best if you enter after she's had a chance to introduce herself and explain the general purpose of the meeting." Through the thin wall separating the two rooms, I could hear muffled voices as my family members arrived one by one. My father's booming, authoritative tone that had intimidated me throughout my childhood. My mother's high-pitched, nervous laugh that she used when she was trying to charm someone. Brandon's voice, always pitched slightly louder than necessary, as if he needed to dominate every conversation he was part of. They all sounded completely relaxed and unsuspecting, probably assuming this was just another routine business discussion where they could continue manipulating me and the company finances. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Rebecca opened the connecting door between the rooms. "They're all here and settled," she said quietly. "Are you ready for this?" I nodded, straightening the tie on my best suit, the same one I had worn to Tyler's christening years ago. I had chosen it deliberately as a reminder of why I was doing this and what I was fighting to protect. Walking into that conference room was honestly one of the most difficult things I had ever done in my life. 3 heads turned toward me simultaneously, their expressions shifting rapidly from mild confusion to growing wariness as they took in my serious expression and Rebecca's unmistakably professional demeanor. "What exactly is going on here?" my father demanded, his voice already taking on the aggressive tone he used when he felt challenged. "Who is this woman, and why are we meeting with lawyers?" "I'm Rebecca Torres, legal counsel for your son," she replied with smooth professionalism, settling into her chair with complete confidence. "Thank you all for taking the time to come here today. We have some very serious matters to discuss regarding Twin Brothers Construction and related financial irregularities." "Legal counsel?" Brandon laughed, though his eyes were darting nervously between Rebecca and me, clearly trying to assess the situation. "What the hell, bro? If you had concerns about how the business was being run, why didn't you just talk to me directly instead of involving lawyers?" I remained completely silent, letting Rebecca take the lead exactly as we had planned. This was her area of expertise, and I trusted her to handle the initial presentation of evidence. "We've been conducting a thorough investigation into your finances for the past 4 months, she said calmly, opening a thick folder that sat in front of her. "What we discovered is systematic fraud and tax evasion spanning several years." The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 20 degrees. My father's face flushed dark red with anger and embarrassment. My mother's hand flew to her throat in a gesture of shock and dismay. Brandon's cocky, dismissive smile vanished completely. "That's completely ridiculous," my father sputtered, his voice rising with indignation. "This is a family business that we've all worked hard to build together. We've done absolutely nothing wrong." Rebecca ignored his protests entirely, sliding copies of the comprehensive summary document across the polished conference table. "This document outlines our detailed findings," she said matter-of-factly. "I strongly suggest that you review it very carefully before making any further statements that might compromise your legal position." For several long minutes, The only sounds in the room were the shuffling of papers and my mother's increasingly distressed breathing as they absorbed the evidence. I watched their faces carefully as they read through the precise documentation of their theft, laid out in black and white with meticulous attention to detail. Brandon was the first to recover his composure and attempt to mount a defense. His expression hardened as he looked up from the documents. "This is completely insane," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "I've worked incredibly hard building this business from the ground up, while you've been nothing more than a silent partner at best. You have absolutely no idea what it actually takes to run a construction company day to day. Is that why you needed $17,000 in emergency equipment repairs?" I asked quietly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "The exact same week that you purchased your new boat? Or why the company apparently needed to pay for your twins' private school tuition as a legitimate educational business expense?" Brandon's face went pale as he realized that we had documentation of specific transactions that he thought he had hidden successfully. "You're taking all of this completely out of context," Brandon said defensively, scrambling to find some plausible explanation for the evidence we had presented. "The context is quite clear," Rebecca interjected smoothly, her voice remaining perfectly professional. "You have systematically diverted company funds for personal use while falsely reporting business losses to the majority owner. You have created fraudulent tax documents that created significant liability for Mr. Thompson. You forged Mr. Thompson's signature on corporate resolutions authorizing payments to yourself and your parents. Each of these actions constitutes a serious legal violation with potential criminal consequences." My mother began to cry at this point, her carefully applied makeup starting to streak down her cheeks. "We're family," she sobbed, looking directly at me with wounded eyes. "How could you possibly do this to us? After everything we've been through together?" I felt the familiar surge of guilt rising in my chest. That automatic emotional response I had been conditioned to feel whenever they expressed disappointment or hurt. It was the same psychological manipulation they had used on me my entire life. But this time, I forced myself to push that feeling down and focus on what really mattered. "How could you do this to Tyler?" I countered, my voice growing stronger. "That was his future that you were systematically stealing. His inheritance money that should have been set aside for his education and opportunities. All while you treated him like he was some kind of afterthought compared to the twins." "We have always loved Tyler," my father insisted, his voice rising defensively. "This whole confrontation isn't about him at all. The Universal Studios trip was absolutely about him," I replied firmly. "The one you told him I didn't want to take him on. The one you paid for with company funds immediately after borrowing $3,500 from me for supposedly emergency roof repairs that apparently never existed." My father had the decency to look genuinely ashamed at that specific accusation, but Brandon immediately went on the offensive instead of acknowledging any wrongdoing. "So you hired some shark lawyer to come after your own family over what amounts to some accounting irregularities?" he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Real nice move there, bro. What kind of person does something like that to their own blood?" "The kind of person who's finally done being exploited and manipulated," I answered, surprised by how steady and confident my voice sounded. "The kind of person who's finally standing up for himself and his son instead of being a doormat." Rebecca took control of the conversation again, outlining our specific demands in precise legal language. As she detailed the financial restitution that would be required, the management changes that needed to be implemented, and the signed admissions of wrongdoing we expected, their expressions shifted from shock and denial to genuine outrage. "This is nothing but extortion," my father growled, his face growing even redder. "We'll fight this in court. We'll hire our own lawyers and prove that you're the one trying to defraud us." "You're absolutely welcome to pursue that course of action," Rebecca replied with calm confidence. "But I should make you aware that our next step would be to present all of this evidence of tax fraud and document forgery to the district attorney's office. The potential penalties for those particular crimes include substantial financial fines and significant prison sentences." "You would actually send your own family to jail?" my mother asked, her voice filled with horror and disbelief as she stared at me. For a moment, I felt myself hesitate under the weight of their collective stares. The shared history between us, the childhood conditioning to prioritize their needs and feelings above my own, the years of being told that family loyalty was the most important thing in the world. It all pressed down on me like a crushing weight. Then I thought about Tyler carefully organizing his mineral collection by geological type. Tyler being told by these same people that he needed to toughen up and stop being so sensitive. Tyler thinking that I had deliberately excluded him from a family vacation because I was too busy with work to care about spending time with him. You had 4 years to treat me and Tyler with basic respect and honesty, I said finally, my voice steady despite the emotional turmoil I was feeling. 4 years to be transparent about the business finances and operations. 4 years to be the supportive, loving family that we both needed after losing Lisa. Instead, you chose to treat us like your personal ATM while undermining Tyler's self-confidence at every opportunity. I stood up from my chair, ready to leave them to process everything we had presented. You made your choices over and over again for 4 years. Now I'm making mine. Brandon stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is completely insane, he said, his voice rising. I'm not signing anything. Dad, let's get out of here right now. Before you leave, Rebecca said evenly, you should know that we've already placed legal liens on your personal property, including your home and the boat that was purchased with diverted company funds. We've also frozen all business accounts pending resolution of this matter. Brandon froze in place, the color draining from his face as the reality of our legal position finally hit him. You can't actually do that, he said weakly. We already have, Rebecca replied matter-of-factly. Judge Williams signed the orders yesterday morning based on the evidence of ongoing fraud and financial misconduct. The full implications of what we had accomplished began to sink in for Brandon. I have mortgage payments due next week. Car payments. The twins' private school tuition is due soon. My father, always the pragmatist even when he was angry, was the first to recognize the futility of further resistance. What exactly do you want from us? He asked, his voice suddenly subdued and defeated. Rebecca slid another comprehensive document across the polished conference table with practiced efficiency. This settlement agreement outlines our terms in detail, she explained professionally. Full financial restitution of $757,586 to be paid within 90 days. Immediate resignation of Brandon Thompson from all operational roles within Twin Brothers Construction. Transfer of all business operations to Westfield Management Group, which will report directly to Mr. Thompson as the rightful majority owner, and signed statements acknowledging the financial misconduct that has occurred. That's completely impossible, Brandon protested, his voice cracking with desperation. I don't have that kind of money just sitting around in bank accounts. The sale of your lake house and boat would cover approximately half of the required amount, Rebecca noted, consulting her notes. The remainder could be structured as a reasonable payment plan, secured by your primary residence as collateral. My mother began to sob in earnest now, the full reality of their situation finally sinking in. We'll lose everything we've worked for, she cried. Our home, our security, everything. You should have considered those consequences before systematically stealing from my son's future, I replied, rising from my chair with a sense of finality. You have exactly 48 hours to accept these terms and begin the restitution process. After that deadline passes, we proceed immediately with criminal charges and let the district attorney handle the situation. As I walked toward the conference room door, my father called after me with desperation tinging his voice. This isn't what Lisa would have wanted for her family, Daniel. She wouldn't want you destroying her son's relationship with his grandparents and extended family. I stopped walking, anger surging through me like electricity. Don't you dare speak for her, I said, turning back to face him. Lisa saw through all of you years before I was smart enough to figure it out. She would have done exactly this the very first time you treated Tyler as less important than the twins. The first time you blamed me for her death with your cruel comments about better hospitals and how she worked too hard taking care of me, leaving them sitting there, surrounded by the overwhelming evidence of their betrayal and the legal consequences they were facing, should have felt triumphant and satisfying. Instead, I felt hollow and emotionally drained. There was no real satisfaction in seeing their shocked faces or listening to their desperate protests. Only the grim recognition that this confrontation had been absolutely necessary, even though it was tragic that it had come to this point. In the elevator down to the parking garage, my hands were shaking uncontrollably. The future felt completely uncertain now. The family structure I had grown up with was effectively gone forever, destroyed by their greed and my refusal to continue enabling it. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was truly honoring Lisa's memory, truly protecting our son from further harm, and truly standing up for myself instead of being a victim. 48 hours later, Rebecca called to inform me that my family had accepted the settlement terms. Not with grace, genuine remorse, or any acknowledgement of the pain they had caused. But they had signed the necessary papers nonetheless. I should have felt victorious and vindicated, but instead I experienced a complicated mixture of relief, lingering guilt, and deep sadness for what could have been the supportive, loving family I had desperately wanted Tyler to have. The reality was that the family I had envisioned for Tyler, supportive grandparents who celebrated his interests, a fun uncle who encouraged his curiosity, cousins who treated him as an equal, had never actually existed in the first place. I had been chasing a fantasy while ignoring the obvious reality of their manipulative and harmful behavior. 2 days after they accepted the settlement, I received a text message from my mother that perfectly encapsulated their complete inability to accept responsibility. I hope you're happy now that you've completely destroyed this family. After everything we've done for you over the years, this is how you repay us. It was classic manipulation. Even when faced with overwhelming evidence of their wrongdoing, they still positioned themselves as the victims of my unreasonable behavior. In their minds, they had done nothing wrong, and I was the villain who had torn apart an innocent family for purely selfish reasons. I didn't respond to the message. There was simply nothing left to say that would make any difference. The time for explanations, justifications, and attempts at reconciliation had passed long ago. The following weeks brought massive, sweeping changes to every aspect of our lives. Brandon was immediately removed from all operational roles at Twin Brothers Construction and replaced by a professional management team from Westfield Group. The initial comprehensive reviews of the business revealed something that shouldn't have surprised me, but somehow still did. The company was actually in excellent financial shape, profitable with a solid industry reputation, and several major construction contracts already in progress. My brother had actually been quite competent at running the day-to-day operational side of the construction business. The problem was that he had been systematically diverting all the profits to himself and our parents instead of growing the company or paying the rightful dividends to me as the majority owner. The financial restitution process came in pieces over several weeks, each payment feeling like another severed family tie and another nail in the coffin of any possible future relationship. Brandon was forced to sell his lake house and the expensive boat, generating the first substantial chunk of money. My parents liquidated various investments and took out a second mortgage on their home to cover their portion of the debt. Every single payment felt like concrete evidence of how far our family had fallen and how completely trust had been shattered. Despite complying with all the legal requirements of the settlement, they made their personal feelings about the situation crystal clear through various communications. My father left a voicemail message that I found on my phone one evening. I never thought my own son would turn on his family like this. Your mother can barely get out of bed some days because of what you've done to us. I just hope that whatever you think you're getting out of this whole mess is worth what you've done to the people who love you. I deleted the message without responding. The old guilt tactics and emotional manipulation techniques simply didn't work on me anymore. I had heard their true feelings about Tyler and me in my own kitchen, and no amount of manufactured victimhood could make me forget that conversation. The only real surprise in the whole restitution process came when Tyler's expensive private school called me out of the blue to verify that I would be continuing to pay the twins' tuition for the upcoming semester. Apparently, Brandon had listed me as the financially responsible party without my knowledge or consent, creating yet another unauthorized financial commitment made in my name. I'm afraid there's been a serious misunderstanding, I told the school administrator politely but firmly. I have never agreed to pay for the twins' education, nor will I be doing so in the future. You'll need to work out payment arrangements directly with their parents. That led to another angry, accusatory text message from Brandon. Thanks a lot for forcing my girls to change schools and disrupting their education. Real nice uncle move there, bro. I blocked his phone number after receiving that message. I was done being blamed for the natural consequences of their own criminal behavior. 4 months after the initial confrontation, life had begun to stabilize into a new and much healthier routine. Twin Brothers Construction was absolutely thriving under professional management, generating steady profits that were being properly distributed. The first legitimate profit distributions had been deposited into a carefully managed educational trust fund for Tyler's future college expenses and opportunities. The forensic accountant had successfully untangled most of the complex tax mess that had been created by their fraudulent filings. While I did have to pay some penalties and interest to the IRS, the worst of the potential financial damage had been successfully mitigated through Rebecca's aggressive legal work. Then, about 3 weeks into this new stability, I received a thick envelope in the mail with my father's distinctive handwriting on the outside. Inside was a collection of old family photographs that I had assumed were lost forever in the family rift. There were pictures from my childhood, photos of Lisa and me during our college years, our wedding day, and Tyler as a newborn baby in the hospital. A brief, handwritten note accompanied the photographs. These belong with you and Tyler. Whatever else has happened between us adults, he should know his family history and where he comes from. It wasn't an apology by any stretch of the imagination. There was no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no expression of remorse, and no promise to do better in the future. But it was something. A small recognition of Tyler's right to his own heritage and family history, separate from the current conflict between the adults. That night, I sat with Tyler on his bed, going through the photographs together one by one. "Is that really Mom?" he asked, pointing to a picture of Lisa laughing joyfully at our college graduation ceremony. "That's really her," I confirmed, feeling my throat tighten with emotion. "She was beautiful, wasn't she?" "She looked so happy," Tyler observed, studying the photo carefully. "She was incredibly happy," I told him, "especially when she found out she was going to have you. You were the best thing that ever happened to both of us." Tyler studied each photograph with careful attention, asking thoughtful questions about the people and places he saw, creating stories in his mind about moments he had never experienced, but that were an important part of his personal history nonetheless. "Dad, why don't we see Grandma and Grandpa and Uncle Brandon anymore?" Tyler asked, the question I had been dreading for weeks. How do you explain to a 7-year-old child that his grandparents had been systematically stealing from his future? That they saw him as fundamentally less important and valuable than his cousins? That they had been manipulating his father for years while undermining his self-confidence with cruel comments disguised as helpful advice? Sometimes grown-ups make choices that end up hurting other people, I said carefully, choosing my words with extreme care. Even when those people are supposed to be family, who love and support each other. I had to make some very difficult decisions to protect us and make sure you have everything you need for your future. Tyler nodded solemnly, processing this explanation with the serious consideration that he brought to everything in his young life. "Will I ever see the twins again?" he asked, and I could hear the genuine sadness in his voice. "I honestly don't know, buddy," I replied truthfully. "Maybe someday when everyone has had time to think about things and figure out how to do better. But right now, we need to focus on being the best family we can be. Just you and me and Aunt Jessica, who loves us both very much." Tyler seemed satisfied with that answer for the moment, returning his attention to the photographs and absorbing his family history. I watched him carefully as he processed the good memories mixed with the complicated present situation, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, a deep sense of peace. It wasn't happiness exactly because there was still too much sadness and loss involved, but it was a calm certainty that I had done the right thing for both of us, that I had finally protected what mattered most instead of continuing to enable people who were actively harming us. The following months settled into a new routine that was dramatically different from our previous life. Tyler thrived in his summer science program, ironically, the same type of program that Brandon had tried to guilt me into funding for the twins. Tyler's program cost less than half of what Brandon had been demanding for his daughters, and more importantly, Tyler actually wanted to be there. He came home every day excited to tell me about new experiments and discoveries. Work became much more manageable with the steady income stream from Twin Brothers construction finally flowing to its rightful owner. I was able to reduce my hours slightly, which meant spending more quality time with Tyler. For the first time in years, I could actually be present and engaged instead of constantly stressed about money and financial survival. Jessica remained a constant, stabilizing presence in our lives, continuing to be Tyler's unofficial aunt and my voice of reason. She never once said, "I told you so," even though she had every right to feel vindicated. Instead, she just continued being exactly the kind of family that Tyler deserved. Supportive, encouraging, and genuinely interested in his well-being. One evening, as Tyler and I worked together on a science project for his class, building a volcano that would actually erupt with baking soda and vinegar, he looked up at me with Lisa's eyes and said something that hit me harder than any legal victory or financial recovery. "Dad, I'm glad it's just us now," he said matter-of-factly. "I mean, I do miss having more family around sometimes, but I really like that you fight for me, that you make sure I'm important, and that my feelings matter." Those simple words from my son meant more to me than any vindication of my choices or any amount of money we had recovered. They came from the person who mattered most in my world. the person I had fought so hard to protect from further emotional and financial harm. "You are the most important thing in my entire world," I told him, my voice thick with emotion. "And you always will be, no matter what." 6 months after the initial confrontation with my family, I received one final communication from them. It was a generic Christmas card from my mother. Standard holiday wishes with a winter scene on the front, no personal message inside, and no acknowledgement of everything that had happened between us. But Tyler's name was included alongside mine in the card's address, which felt like a small but potentially significant gesture. Perhaps it was a recognition that whatever had happened between the adults, Tyler was still their grandson and deserved some acknowledgement of that relationship. I didn't respond to the Christmas card, but I also didn't throw it away immediately. Maybe someday there would be room for some kind of reconciliation, though it would have to be on very different terms. Maybe Tyler would want to have some kind of relationship with his grandparents when he was old enough to understand the full story and make his own informed choices about who deserved a place in his life. But that was a decision for the future. For now, we had each other. We had Jessica's unwavering support. We had a stable home and a financially secure future. Most importantly, we had the truth. No more manipulation, no more taking advantage of grief and guilt, and no more treating Tyler as somehow less important than other children who happened to share his DNA. Whatever happened next in our lives, whether genuine reconciliation with my family would ever be possible or not, I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the right decision. Not just in confronting the financial fraud and theft, but in breaking the destructive cycles of manipulation and conditional love that had defined my entire childhood and early adult years. Tyler would grow up knowing his true worth as a person. He would grow up knowing that he was loved unconditionally, regardless of whether he met arbitrary expectations or compared favorably to other children. Most importantly, he would grow up knowing that the adults in his life would fight for him when it truly mattered, that his well-being and future were worth protecting at any cost. Sometimes I realize that knowledge is the most valuable gift a parent can give their child. The unshakable understanding that they are worth fighting for, that their happiness and security matter more than maintaining toxic relationships or avoiding difficult confrontations. As I reflected on everything we had been through, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the people who had truly supported us during the most difficult period of our lives. Jessica, who had seen the truth long before I was ready to accept it, and had patiently waited for me to find the courage to act. Rebecca Torres and her legal team, who had fought tirelessly to recover what was rightfully ours. The teachers and counselors at Tyler's school, who had recognized his potential and encouraged his interests without trying to change who he was. These were the people who constituted our real family, not because of shared DNA or legal obligations, but because they had chosen to care about our well-being and had demonstrated that care through their actions during our most vulnerable moments. The financial security that came from finally having control over twin brothers' construction meant that Tyler would have opportunities I had never been able to provide before. College would be fully funded through the educational trust we had established. He could pursue whatever interests and career paths appealed to him without worrying about crushing student debt. If he wanted to study marine biology or astronomy or engineering, those dreams were now financially achievable. But more than the money, what mattered was the emotional security he was gaining. He was learning that he deserved to be treated with respect and kindness. He was learning that his interests and opinions mattered to the adults in his life. He was learning that love didn't come with conditions or require him to minimize himself to make other people comfortable. Looking back on the entire ordeal, I realized that my family's betrayal had been both devastating and ultimately liberating. It had forced me to confront truths about our relationship that I had been avoiding for years. It had pushed me to develop a backbone and fight for what mattered most, instead of simply accepting whatever treatment they chose to give us. The grief I felt for the family relationships we had lost was real and valid. There would always be a part of me that mourned the supportive grandparents Tyler would never have, the fun uncle who could have been a positive male role model, the cousins who could have been lifelong friends and allies. The fantasy of that ideal extended family had sustained me through some very dark times after Lisa's death. But that fantasy had been preventing me from seeing the reality of how we were actually being treated. It had been keeping me trapped in patterns of behavior that were ultimately harmful to both Tyler and me. Sometimes, the healthiest thing you can do is let go of what you wish relationships could be and focus on protecting yourself from what they actually are. The most important lesson I learned through this entire experience was that family loyalty should never be a one-way street. Real love and support require reciprocity, honesty, and genuine care for each other's well-being. When family members consistently take advantage of your generosity, undermine your confidence, and prioritize their own needs above yours, they have already broken the bonds that make family relationships meaningful. Standing up for yourself and your child in those situations isn't selfish or vindictive. It's necessary and healthy. It's modeling for your child that they deserve to be treated well, that their needs and feelings matter, and that it's okay to set boundaries with people who don't respect those boundaries. Tyler was now growing up in an environment where his worth wasn't constantly being questioned or compared to others, where his interests were celebrated rather than criticized, where the adults in his life prioritized his emotional and financial security over maintaining relationships with people who had proven themselves untrustworthy. That was the real victory. Not the money we recovered or the legal vindication we achieved, but the healthier, more authentic life we were building together. A life based on truth, respect, and genuine love rather than manipulation, guilt, and conditional acceptance. As Tyler grew older, he would understand more about what had happened and why we had made the choices we made. He would be able to make his own decisions about what kind of relationships, if any, he wanted to have with his extended family. But he would make those decisions from a position of strength and self-knowledge rather than from desperation or a need for approval. And that, I realized, was exactly what Lisa would have wanted for both of us.